Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is indeed for us a real pleasure to be hosting CCROSS first social security's first webinar, research webinar. So before I start, I will go and ask, and we start our day, I will ask our resident pastor and one of the panelists this morning, Mr. Reginald Thomas, to lead us in prayer, please. And then we will get going on our day. Reggie, the floor is yours.
Let us pray. Quiet our hearts, O God, and bring us into a space of connection and remembrance. Bring us into a space to tend, to support, and to lead. To tend in ways so that the issue of reform and good governance for social security and social protection throughout our region will be heightened. To tend so that we support all the persons who are in the various sectors in the tripartite agency so that they can understand the significance of their role. To tend so that we be timely in our interventions so that others will have a decent quality of life. So as we meet in this way and as we collaborate and as we share, warm our hearts with ideas so that in the final analysis, the outcome of this meeting and this webinar and the research from CCROSS will add value to all participants, to all workers, to all contributors. So we give you now the praise, the glory, and the honor. We thank you for bringing us all to this session. We bless your name through Christ, your Son, our Lord. And we say amen.
Thank you, Reggie, for this very empowering prayer. And yes, we will get ourselves started. So again, I want to welcome each and every one of you here for being present at our first webinar. Before I will just run you the order of the day, I will give you a little background on who CCROSS is, as well as the outline. I will then do the bios of the speakers, up front, so that when we come to the presentations by each panelist, they will just go, so it will be seamless. We will keep questions until this segment for questions, so please have your pen, your paper, or, in this digital world, your device, so you can write your questions down, or your comments, so when we come, and take notes, because this is really going to be, last evening we had a brief where the panelists, were running through their presentation, and I'm telling you, it's not only going to be informational and educational, it's going to be an enlightening and inspirational session. Yes, Social Security can be inspirational. We know Social Security is really critical in our world, and even more critical in the region. The Social Security institutions, they are the largest one mobilized of savings in our region. And we know that savings are important for wealth creation. So Social Securities have a role to play in wealth creation of our nations. But very, very importantly, and on a personal level, Social Security institutions are the main source of income for pensioners in their retirement age. In other countries, Social Security might be a small percentage because they have private pensions, they have employers' pensions, and other forms of wealth and income in retirement. But for the region, the data continues to show that our Social Security institutions provide the largest and the main source of income for our people and for ourselves, and it's very important. So CCROSS, the Caribbean Research on Social Security was formed, the discussion was in 2023. And our first meeting was held on August 15th, 2023. It's an initiative of Professor Fieda, also Dr. Lafocard, and the team of the Health Economic, Carl Fieda and Alfred Lafocard, of the Health Economic Unit of the University of the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago. And they had this great idea of enhancing and advancing the Social Security research agenda in the Caribbean. Because truthfully, if you do a search for Social Security research, there's lots of research. But the research on the Caribbean specific, and though we are grouped with Latin America and the Caribbean, there isn't as much. Yet we have a body of information, a body of knowledge in the region. Because our first Social Security, Jamaica, I believe it was established in 1916 in the Caribbean. So that's that's what, more than 50 years, that's more than 60 years. And so we have our own story. And part of it, there is a uniqueness to the Social Security story in the Caribbean. We have the brains, we have the research, we have the intelligentsia. And I think it's time that we tell our own story. And then our story can then wage itself against the story on the international agenda. And you will see today, in terms of the panelists chosen, that we will cover Social Security reform, addressing the issues and importance of Social Security from 3 key dimensions. One would be from the overall dimension of Social Security reform and governance. The second dimension is now our Caribbean story with Social Security reform within the Caribbean and the issues of governance and importance from a practitioner's view, which is what Mr. Haynes will bring. And then on an international level, Joanna was the manager of the ILO, International Labour Organization office in Trinidad and Tobago, which serves the region, will then give us the international perspective. So at the end of this day, we're going to leave not just informed and educated, we're going to leave enlightened so that it can guide our actions, it can guide our decision. But knowing that, we can then, engage in the debate and provide information for those who are not present this morning. I was going to tell you a little bit more of CCROSS. Also, the broad objectives of CCROSS are 2 main objectives, so advance the research agenda, but also to support the CARICOM social security institutions. And we will do so by to develop a regional targeted research agenda for social security to support policy action, to conduct research on social security, which is both relevant and meaningful, and guided by the defined research agenda, to develop databases of existing research, policy documents, position papers, and technical briefs on issues related to social security in the region, to facilitate greater regional collaboration, dialogue, and engagement to engender policy action and safeguard the future of social security systems in the Caribbean, and to establish a platform for the dissemination of research and knowledge products on social security. Before I end today, when I come to do the wrap-up, I will share with you the research agenda for 2024 into 2025 of CCROSS. The committee, as it exists, consists of Professor Carl Fieda, Dr. Alfred Lafocard, Mr. Reginald Thomas, Mr. Stuart Haynes, Mr. Derek Osborne, Ms. Joanna Burgess, Ms. Patricia Weston, Mr. Chanel Thompson, and I serve as the chair of the committee. We are also open to members, and we have members and representation of the CARICOM social security institutions. So without much ado, I now present to you our three panelists. I'm going to start off with Mr. Reginald Thomas, who is going to be the opening batsman of this panel discussion today. Mr. Reginald F.A. Thomas is a regional Social Security expert and former executive director of the National Insurance Services of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. His tenure at the NIS SVG for over 2 decades saw the implementation and strengthening of the financial sustainability, governance, and accountability frameworks of the institution, leading to recognition by the international bodies. Reginald's vast training and expertise in the region have also allowed him to serve as executive director of the Inter-American Center for Social Security Studies, CIS, based in Mexico City, Mexico, and he was the first Caribbean representative to hold this position. So a pioneer and a breaker of ceilings. Presently, Mr. Thomas serves as the chairman of KCL Capital Market Brokers Limited, a senior World Bank consultant, as well as a social protection coach with the International Labour Organization. Additionally, he serves as a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Caville School of Business. He is the holder of an MBA and a certified pension consultant with the American Society of Pension and Actuaries. Reginald also finds time to participate in civil society and in organizations such as the Rotary Club of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Methodist Church in the Caribbean and the Americas. So ladies, this is Mr. Reginald Thomas. I move on now to Mr. Stuart Haynes. Mr. Stuart Haynes currently serves as the Executive Director of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines National Insurance Services, a position he has held from February 2017. So that is 7 years in that post. They say 7 is the number of perfection. So, Stuart, this is your perfect year for perfect change and transformation. He is a fellow of the Faculty and Institute of Actuaries and a chartered financial analyst by profession. Not many in our region. He's one of the few. He's joined the ranks. I'm also a CFA. In 2018, Mr. Haynes was elected to the Bureau of the International Social Security Association, ISA, based in Geneva, Switzerland. Further, in 2020, he was appointed as ISA's vice chairperson of the Technical Commission on Investment or Social Security Funds and appointed as a member of ISA's Finance Committee for the triennium 2023 to 2025. He serves as the focal point for ISA in the English-speaking Caribbean, representing the social security institutions of the English-speaking Caribbean. In addition to his capacity as Executive Director of the NIS SVG, Mr. Haynes is currently serving as a Director of the Financial Services Authority, the Eastern Caribbean Financial Holding Company, ECFH, and the Eastern Caribbean Home Mortgage Bank, ECHMB. Mr. Stuart Haynes holds a BSc in Actuarial Science from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and an MSc in Actuarial Management from Cass Business School, London, with a specialty in investment management. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Stuart Haynes, one of our few actuaries from the region. And then our last panelist, Ms. Joanna Burgess. Ms. Joanna Burgess, a national of Portugal and Cape Verde, joined the ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean in November 2022 as specialist social protection and occupational safety and health. Ms. Burgess joined the ILO in 2012 as manager and coordinator of technical cooperation projects which supported the promotion and strengthening of social protection systems and decent work in African Portuguese-speaking countries. Later, in 2020 to 2022, she served as social protection specialist for Central Africa, covering 9 countries. And prior to joining the ILO, she worked for 7 years in the Ministry of Labor, Solidarity and Social Security of Portugal. You can see that Ms. Burgess is well equipped to be here. Social security experience spanning the developed world, Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. So her international perspective would be really very interesting. She holds a MSc in Social Policy and Development by the London School of Economics, United Kingdom, a postgraduate degree in Economics and Social Policy by the Lisbon School of Economics and Management, Portugal, and a degree in Economics by the University of Algarve in Portugal. So we have 2 LSC alumni here, Ms. Borges and Mr. Haynes, and we have a few UE alumni here, Mr. Thomas, myself, Professor Fiedo, Dr. Lafourcade, Mr. Thompson, and the host of others. So ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the bios. You've seen that we brought you a team of experts, and it is with great pleasure I now invite Mr. Reginald Thomas to take the stage and to lead us as he explores the issues of social security and governance on the overall and wider context. Mr. Thomas, the floor is yours. Come in with a round of applause.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank the organizers of CCROSS and the participants and all those who have taken the time out to be with us today as we navigate, as we deliberate, as we discuss this very important issue of good governance and social security reform in the Caribbean. My presentation today is really going to be very provocative. And so I wish to start by saying the issue of reform, the issue of good governance, which is the cart or which is the horse? Which ought to come before? Which is the driver? If good governance is the dominant factor and exists from inception, what will reform look like? Or what will reform ought to be? What will be the extent of the reform that is needed and necessary through the social protection system throughout the region and in the wider world? What will be the level and the sense of engagement of all of the parties? How essential will be the timing for reform and the support and ownership of reform itself? Next, I want to ask us to examine the why of reform, the why of governance, sorry. So I ask, is governance a critical success factor? Is it? Should there be engagement regarding governance, and what should that engagement be like? Who should be in the room or in the circle, or who should be the key partners for the engagement? And what framework should, or I would say must be in place for ongoing discussions and governance? Is a reporting and a disclosure accountability system necessary for us to safeguard this critical success factor of governance? So today, when we speak of governance, not just governance, good governance. What are we referring to? So I went to the ESA's website, and this is what I want to present for us today, that the ESA defines governance as the manner in which the vested authority uses its power to achieve the institution's objective, including its power to design, note that word, implement, and innovate the organization's policies, rules, systems, and processes, and further, and engage and involve the stakeholders. Good governance, therefore, implies, as the ESA sees it, that the exercise of the vested authority is accountable, transparent, predictable, participative, and dynamic. So the ESA has determined the approach and the significance of the key components of governance. I want to deliberately flip the script this morning so as to propose a contextual representation for engaging the audience today. I used a quote from the ESA's publication, which states that the diversity in governance practices around the world is a reflection of differences in the political, social, economic, cultural histories of our countries. So the determining approach then is further emphasized by the ESA. And the article further states that there is a common recognition, however, that good governance is aimed at delivering what is mandated and ensuring that what is delivered is responsive to the evolving needs of the individual and society. Mention is also made of the role of improved education and new technologies, increasing the expectation of the public for accountability and transparency. And ladies and gentlemen, all of this is in relation to the management of the social security systems across, not only in our region, but across the world. So what then? If the quotes from the ESA are significant, and if we were to use those quotes as critical parts to examine and explore what exists, what must the script look like? Governance as the enabling environment, the foundation on which everything else rests. So reform rests on governance, management rests on governance, and a key component of governance, or reform, even if governance is skewed, less than efficient, and less than effective. I believe here what is really significant is the accountability mechanism, the supporting platform to ensure that governance, not only good governance, but good governance is the cart, not the horse. So I ask us further in my deliberation, what if? I propose a what if question for us this morning. What if we hold the issue of representation and responsiveness as key elements and then add responsibility? What should we be asking ourselves today as it relates to governance? So representation, responsiveness, and responsibility. What then if we ask ourselves a what if question? What if? What if the role of the tripartite entities within our jurisdiction be structured in such a way that we have full, involved participation, that we have a strong accountability framework, that we have a watchdog mechanism, that we have whistleblower or whistleblowing policies. What if? How will those things enhance governance for the effectiveness of the representation of social protection? So how then can we enhance governance? If governance is so critical and so important, and if, as the ISA says, it changes across the landscape based on culture, history, politics, how then can we enhance governance to ensure higher levels of engagement, efficiency in operations, on-time representation and reporting, consistency and heightened accountability? What will we see? Is there a need then for a mechanism to insulate proper governance across the region, the sub-region, and the world? And so what if? What if we were to utilize a shareholding framework based on the percentage value of the contributions made within the social protection system? Private sector, government. Further, if we were to assess and evaluate all workers as component of the tripartite entity to impact the appointments and accountability, to ensure that we have timely implementation of actuarial measures and the changes that are necessary as we see the transformation in labor force participation and labor market composition. What will that contribute to the performance of social protection systems in the region? What will that contribute to the timeliness for indexation of pensioners and pensions as it relates to cost of living and quality of life and decency and access to health care and all of those critical mechanisms which the social protection framework seeks to safeguard? What if then we ask ourselves, if all of those mechanisms are in place, if we were to structure a relationship based on a shareholding principle, where based on the value of your contribution, we have a mechanism for accountability as it relates to government and governance, as it relates to employers and all workers and workers' representatives, the tripartite entity, what will we see as an enhancement for engagement process and representation? So what may be possible if we were to flip the script and propose and to structure this shareholder mechanism as it relates to the value of the contributions paid by government, employers, and all workers? What will that look like? It may be interesting, Chair and colleagues, members of the panel, for us to do an assessment of the percentage value of the contributions paid by government, by employers, and by workers. It would be very surprising to know that the significant monetary contributions within the social protection system comes from employers and workers. Government, yes, the single largest employer, but government is not the single largest contributor financially to social protection system. I want to propose then that what may be possible if the framework is enhanced We will have improved representation. I want to ask the question, what then will that mean for enhanced compliance and higher levels of participation and reduction in the evasion of Social Security payments? What will that mean for transparency and predictable dynamics as the ILO says and presents are key components of social protection and governance? Will there be a higher and a stronger correlation between reform and governance if the governance mechanism, if the principles, if the components of governance and good governance seek to strengthen and enhance engagement, if those things are in place, as I said, based on a shareholder principle? We all remember the slogan, "He who pays the piper calls the tune." If I'm a shareholder and I have 65% of a shareholding, then I'm the majority shareholder. What are my rights? What do I contribute? What responsibilities do I have? So if this can be achieved, what will reform look like? Would we have less resistance to reform? Would we have higher levels of acceptance? Will the timing for implementation of actuarial recommendation and increase in contribution rate and indexation of pensions, will all those things then be standard operating procedures within the systems? Because we have the highest value, the highest contribution as it relates to governance, not governance only, but good governance. Who will take the bull by the horn? Who will advocate for stronger relationships between the tripartite entities to enhance governance and so strengthen the operational framework of the social protection systems across the region, so as to allow for greater levels of engagement, greater participation, stronger reporting, more effective management, and more on-time representation as it relates to Social Security and its connection to the populations? When will that be done? Is this the time for us then to see and to safeguard what works and to enhance and embellish the operating frameworks across our region to heighten this very critical component, as the ESA says, of good governance? And when that is done, will the extent of reforms be easier? Will it be more understood across the landscape? When we heighten participation to include the schools, when we strengthen the relationships between the tripartite entity, as I mentioned earlier, how will that relate to compliance, participation, productivity, and performance? What will governance look like then? If based on your value of your contribution as joint employers, joint employees, we have a seat at the table, we are in the room, and we collaborate and cooperate together for the betterment of social protection. Madam Chair and fellow colleagues, I want to say one thing finally. Reforms across the region is necessary. because we have to adjust our systems to the emerging context, changing birth rate, heightened levels of NCDs, and what that means for labor force participation and productivity and contribution to the social security. But when governance is safeguarded and strengthened, what will be the outcome of a strong investment policy where social security contributions are invested in a holistic way? What ought to be our approach? As many years ago, we wanted to put in place a joint system across the Caribbean for investment. What will that look like? Do we have the governance framework to support all of those key components that are really necessary at a time like now for the sustainability of social protection systems across the region, in which in many cases, in many countries, more than 85% of the population in many of our countries have nothing else to depend on for retirement. Those are my challenging questions for us this morning as I open the batting. Madam Chair, I hand the ball back over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Very engaging. You have started off that would be the openest batsman. I think that would be like a century you would have scored there if we were in a game of cricket. And so setting a great platform for the rest of the players. Indeed, you've raised some really interesting, you've challenged us to very thought-provoking comments. And Chanel will give a summary. So I don't want to run into that, but I really want to just stress on a few points that you would have made there in terms of the ownership, how Social Security, if the governance is widened and we recognize that we are the key stakeholders in the Social Security system, and how would that enhance in terms of reduction of evasion of contributions and even registration, enhance compliance, enhance compliance, which would then lead to enhance participation, enhance productivity, and enhance performance. CPP, the three P's with a C. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And we give you a rose. Our next person ready to come on board with us is Mr. Stuart Haynes. And Stuart will be discussing good governance, importance, and issues relating to Social Security reform, a practitioner's perspective. Stuart, the floor is yours. We see you are all ready, so take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Paula Henry, Chair, and also the other members of the panel and the persons who took the time out to listen to this conversation. I intentionally shared my screen early so that persons could see the beautiful island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Just a glimpse of what to come. So the conversation, it is a conversation this morning, and the conversation roadmap is around setting the scene. Mr. Reginald Thomas and the chair has done a good job with regards to setting the scene for this conversation on Social Security reform and good governance. Then we have to have some understanding of good governance, because good governance means different things to different persons in different regions. Then importantly, we have to assess if we are doing the right things and doing things right. Then we will conclude and the way forward. Social Security reform is everywhere. In Asia, in the Americas, including Caribbean, Pacific, and Europe. Aging population, a prolonged pandemic, natural disasters, and other social economic challenges threaten the sustainability of our safety nets. Regionally, life expectancy is climbing. fertility is declining, and immigration is on the increase, giving rise to acute population aging. And no social security system can successfully achieve its reform objectives, which really are around financial sustainability and public credibility, without adopting good governance policies and practices. Sound governance depends on the capacity of persons supervising, governing, and managing the social protection schemes. In the Caribbean, the administration of social security systems is entrusted by statute to the social security organizations, which are governed by a tripartite board, and in all cases under the supervision of government. And the objective of this setup is basically to separate social security financing from government budget. But the important question to ask, does our practice align with this intention? Because on our journey of reform, this is one of the key issues raised by participants. The alignment of this practice of independence between social security organization and the government. In terms of understanding good governance, I script a definition. And it's all about doing the right things right to ensure social security systems achieve their objectives. And two principal objectives are the financial sustainability and public confidence. Governance involves policy level decision, macro and strategic. It also involves organizational or institutional arrangement in terms of how we structure social protection. And importantly, where I sit, administrative operation. So it's how the different stakeholders use their power to achieve social security objectives. On one hand, there's the government, which is the first level, the legislator. Then the board of directors responsible for oversight, but also management has a role to play in terms of administrative element. The major stakeholders that have an important bearing on achieving good governance for social security systems involved. And we have to understand and learn the roles of the different stakeholders to really get a sense whether or not good governance is being carried out. Because generally we can be confused about what is good governance. So the government has a stake. The government is the guarantor of the fund. The government also established social protection program to protect its people. So the government typically determines major policy issues and facilitates a sound economic, financial, and monetary framework, which create the enabling environment for social security system to grow. The government also enacts legislation, whether establishing or modifying social security systems. So clearly influencing the speed and success of reform. Ultimately, the government is responsible for the proper administration and solvency of the schemes if they are the guarantor. But the board also has a role to play in the governance framework. The board governs and sets policies at an institutional level. But the board is responsible also for formulating proposals for reform and development. And the board oversees the implementation of the scheme. And the board is expected to take what we call a view of the holistic operation and not be myopic in its approach. Social security organization management, we administer the scheme. We implement in terms of resolution of the board and manage the day-to-day operation. Scripting it looked like a clear-cut division, but in our reality, across globally, the lines may be somewhat blurred for some system. One person policy decision become another person's set of requirements to be implemented. So in reality, in the execution of responsibilities, there can be blurred line. And that gives rise to the whole issue of whether governance is good or governance is bad. But why good governance is indispensable for the administration of social security system? We see good governance as critical because the access to social security is a fundamental human right. Secondly, these systems are intended to be perpetual. When Stuart gone, they're there. When Dr. Valder Henry gone, they're there. Once there's a St. Vincent, once there's a Dominica, once there's an Antigua, there would be a social security system. And the system is mandatory for all employees through statute. And it's governed by a tripartite board, a board that represents stakeholders, government, employers, and employees. And what is being managed are trust funds. These funds do not belong to board members, to executives, but to the people, the contributors, and the beneficiaries. So, in effect, we are trustees, and we are required to exercise duty of diligence, care, and prudence. And social security systems have evolved into significantly important financial and social institutions. We have monumental impact on lives and livelihoods globally. And it's the principal safety nets for most workers and their dependents. In the St. Vincent context, 85% of our pensioners depend on social security as the only source of income. So, as administrators of social security, we fundamentally believe that good governance had to be indispensable in the way we administer and speak in Caribbean-wide our social security system. Because collectively, as leaders of social security, we fundamentally believe in good governance. But doing the right things, are we doing the right things? Well, most Caribbean social security systems are at a crossroad in financing social security systems. The current path, no reform, which can lead to elevated poverty levels and socioeconomic disruption. There's also the path to sustainability, engage in meaningful reforms to ensure financial sustainability and regional social and economic stability. Recent actuarial investigation and studies of Caribbean social security systems reveal most of the systems are projected to be financially unsustainable in the medium and long term if no reform. Prior to 2022, more than 12 of the 16 English-speaking Caribbean social security systems had funds that would be exhausted within 15 years. We term it fund sufficiency of 15 years. And for 14 of the 16 systems, their total expenditure exceeded contribution income. It means, therefore, that the contributors are not contributing to building the fund, but the through pay-as-you-go. As they contribute, it's being used to pay pension. And 12 out of 16 total expenditures exceeded total income. And when you are at that stage, it means that you are using a proportion of your reserve to meet recurrent operation. So overall, the region's social security systems need reform. Some countries in recent time have been very successful in the implementation of the measures. Other countries are experiencing delays in implementing the needed reform despite objective evidence. Is it the lack of political will since they influence speed and success of reform? And this just gives a snapshot of the cash flow position of the 16 social security systems. There are one who are in stage 1, meaning that their contribution exceed total expenditure. That's a good place to be in, very positive cash flow. There are 3 where contribution income together with investment income, and this is 2020 assessment, exceeded total expenses. And 12 systems are touching their reserve to meet obligation. And thankfully, there are none in zone 4 that where additional resources are required. So the case for reform is strong for the region, right? And what have we been doing over 2022 to 2024? So from the financing side, there have been increasing contribution rate. Some countries have made self-employed mandatory. We have improved investment strategy. On the benefit design, there have been a reduction in the maximum replacement rate. There have been elimination of early retirement, for instance, in Montserrat. There have been increase in retirement age, for instance, Grenada. We consistently engage in administrative reform, which sometimes are ignored because we focus on parametric reform, but administrative reform is critical in terms of upskilling our human resources. Scaling digital transformation is also critical, and also adopting a flexible self-employed program. And we saw Grenada led the way with regards to adjusting their social security program to meet the needs and the realities of the self-employed program, self-employed workers. And on the governance side, there have been some policy coordination across investment policy, risk policy, and funding policy, focusing on the long-term sustainability of social security systems. There have been enhanced reporting to the public. I mean, there are variations across countries, our Caribbean countries, and there have been increased public engagement in the conversation on social security. And if we look at the focusing on contribution rate and the pensionable age, 10 out of the 16 countries have engaged in some element of reform since 2020. So for instance, Anguilla just facing an increase in contribution rate from 10 to 12. Bahamas, they will do that in July 2024, where contribution rate will move from 9.8% to 11.3%. Dominica has what I call an extended phased reform. In 2012, they set their contribution rate adjustment, and that would increase between 2012 to 2031, right? And Dominica moved from 13.5 to 15.5. Grenada started theirs in 2024, their rate will move from 11% to 16%. And we saw Montserrat in 2022 as well. So we are very busy around the region treating with the reform of our system. And prior to 2020, only Barbados and Bahamas offered the unemployment program. And we saw recently Turks and Caicos and Grenada introduce the unemployment program, and they have other countries that are thinking through that. And all that are elements of reform, and that is being dynamic in terms of meeting the needs of our constituents. What we do in reform, the important question, are we doing the right things right? Are we doing reform right? So the benchmarking I have used is ISA Good Governance Guidelines. And the 16 English-speaking countries are members of ISA. ISA actually has about 320 organizations cutting across 160 countries. And as Mr. Thomas indicated in his presentation, that good governance varies because of social, political, economic structure and situation. So once we apply ISA good governance guidelines, we have to apply the relevance and applicability tests, because these are just guidelines. These are not necessarily prescription to fit our Caribbean realities, right? So are we accountable in our whole reform? Are we transparent? Are we predictable in terms of consistent application of the law? Do we engage the public when we engage in social security reform? And are we dynamic in terms of making adjustment, being responsive to the needs of the people? By and large, I think from a Caribbean perspective, we have done this reasonably well. If there are room for improvement, certainly, especially on the transparency end, because there's still, if you go to certain websites, you'd not seen certain information like published accounts and so forth. So there's room for improvement. Whether or not there are commitment to improve, certainly across the 16 countries, because we meet on an annual basis discussing our business of social security and how we can improve our service delivery and how we can build public confidence. Are we acting in accordance with the rules of the scheme? By and large, throughout the region, we are consistently acting within the framework of the law. Are we acting prudently, diligently, and in good faith? Clearly, I believe we pass that test as well. When we engage in reform, are we acting in the best interests of the scheme constituents, the contributors, the beneficiaries, and future beneficiaries? Certainly. The aim is for the long-term sustainability of this system so that social security can be around to improve lives and livelihoods throughout the region. Do we seek expert advice on our journey to reform? Certainly, almost all the countries would engage an independent qualified actuary to assist in terms of the reform and the assessment of the health of the plan. In terms of the investment of the funds, with care, prudence, and diligence, I believe there's scope for improvement there. There's still some countries with significant exposure to the government. There's still some countries that still need to enhance in terms of their investment policy framework to treat it how investments are made. And I discussed with the team the importance for us, and I also received an email from Dr. Theodore about how could we fashion a mechanism that support employment creation through the region. How can we pool resources geared towards job creation? Because at the end of the day, we are in a region where the unemployment rate is above average. And if unemployment rate is above average, it impacts the sustainability of social security. So how can we collaborate and coordinate and carve out resources so that we can drive projects that create employment within the region? With regards to mitigating political risk, and this is where politicians micromanaging social security system, whether influencer level employment or so forth, we're very conscious of the perception of political interference. And as administrators, we work collectively and collaboratively to see how we strengthen the independence of social security. In terms of adopting a risk management framework, sound risk management is critical to good governance. And we are at different places as it relates to the whole risk management function. In some countries, they're at a point where they have a risk unit, a risk committee of the board, and risk policies. In other countries, they manage risk on a decentralized basis. The investment unit manage investment risk, the benefit manage benefit risk, and so on and so forth. So there's scope for improvement with regards to strengthening the risk management function, especially how we're scaling up from digital technology, shows cybersecurity risk management is key. The other important thing for us, given that we manage a sizable portion of the country's GDP, is are we doing financial governance right? We are, as the chairperson said in her opening remarks, the largest mobilizer of savings. And the reserves collectively of Social Security represent 15% above the GDP of the country. And we are an important source to finance economic development in a responsible fashion. So are we effective? Do our system deliver the level of protection set out in the legislation and policy objectives? Certainly through the region, we have a comprehensive benefit package, and we also pass the benefit adequacy test, meaning the benefits are appropriate based on the economic, or adequate based on the economic circumstances. From a coverage standpoint, we do well when it comes to the formal sector. We are about, on average, about 75% good coverage for the formal sector. But we don't do so well as it relates to the informal and the self-employed sector. Think roughly off the bat about 25%. Efficiency. Do we deliver social security services in the most efficient way possible? Digital transformation. We're scaling up with digital transformation to assist in terms of administrative efficiency. And currently, we have countries engaged in changing their management systems. St. Vincent, Dominica, Grenada, Belize, Barbados having the discussion, Trinidad. So more than 10 of our countries are engaged in changing the management system so that we can better deliver social security services and respond to the needs of our constituents. When I compare with the banks are ahead of social security with regards to digital offerings. But the question is, are we committed to improve? Certainly. And our investments in changing our management system, improving in terms of digital service, are testament to our efforts towards reducing administrative efficiency. On a sustainability standpoint, are our system financially and fiscally sustainable over the long term? There are long-term sustainability challenges. We have demographic factors, we have economic factors that really impact the long-term sustainability of social security system. And I think it will come the point, now we speak of parametric reform, but I think it will come a point where we need to have a hard conversation about systemic reform, because you'd hear in your journey that persons asking that increasing contribution rate will be perpetual. So we need to wrap minds around how we can get a systemic reform. That will be the next sort of, that could be a research piece for us at CCROSS. And transparency. Are we using social security resources transparently? Are we publishing the annual accounts? And if we publish it, when do we publish? Because accurate timeliness of information is important. Our actuarial reports and other sort of performance reports are critical for us in terms of enhancing our transparency. I want to share the St. Vincent experience in our 2024 to 2024 reform. We engaged an external actuary. The head actuary is Derek Osborne. I saw him in the virtual audience. And we also engaged the World Bank through the Reserve Advisory Management Program to do a peer review. So we access technical and competent resources to help us through the journey. We also adopted participatory and inclusive approach in stakeholders consultations. We touched government, we touched the opposition, we touched employers, employees, churches, and all length and breadth of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we were very intentional about being transparent and being focused and providing the right information to our Vincentian populace. And also, we were very strategic and proactive in ensuring that we guided by a communication plan. So it's not just an ad hoc conversation with our public, but one that is driven by a communication plan. And the communication plan was informed by our constituents because a survey was done among constituents about a concern about social security. So the model that we adopt, our consultation modality, was around key stakeholders engagement. We deliberate on the reform initiatives. We had wide education sessions, educating the public. We dealt with disagreement naturally of reforms, because there's some person would resist, especially in a time coming out of COVID and significant economic challenges. We had a role to play in terms of increasing the social acceptability of the reform, by our education being transparent and reaching a consensus on the solution. Then the board draft a proposal for the reforms. Then we are at the stage now where we are implementing reform. But one important thing is that we evaluate from the start, during, and we'll continue in terms of evaluating. Then there will be subsequent refinement. And in our evaluation, what we'll do is what we call the sentiment assessment. And there's a sentiment assessment between January and March 2024. So we have 75% positive sentiments and 25% neutral and negative. What weren't people happy about? People expressed concern about the investment in government securities. But clearly, what is important is how you invest. Was it responsible? Did you do your due diligence? Are the government honoring its commitments? And also, did we invest on commercial terms? And we have an investment policy guiding our investment. We have an investment committee. So there's different layers of governance that ensure prudent and responsible investment. Also, we instituted the non-contributory pension program in 1997, and our constituents still have concern about us operating that program. I must say this program is closed for new entrants, so this will continue to run until the last pensioner dies. Right? What are they satisfied about? They were satisfied about the extensive public engagement, and we are still engaging the public, notwithstanding we are the implementation phase of things. And the adequacy and the quality of information shared with the public were recognized as positive on part of St. Vincent social security system. In conclusion, good governance is imperative in achieving social security reform objectives. Good governance in social security requires coordinated actions from 3 levels. The government, guarantor the fund, the board has a responsibility as who oversight the plans, and the management. We, administrators, have responsibility of practicing good governance. And as social security practitioners, it is our fiduciary responsibility to underpin good governance in the administration of social security schemes. Our regional social security systems have progressed in integrating good governance into our social reform initiative. We are still learning, and we are committed to improving, because in a dynamic contextual environment, we must focus on being agile to maintain our relevance and our impact on lives and livelihood. How do we go forward? clearly there are opportunities for improvement. And the first dimension with doing the right things. Governance initiative, we are to focus and enhance our transparency. We heard that through region in our debate, and also the timely implementation of reform. Administrative reform, business continuity plans need to be in place because that is important in terms of the sustainability of social security system.
Noises are coming through. Thank you.
Chair, the development of funding policy is important that we fashion a funding policy for our social security systems and one that take into account automatic adjustment. So therefore, it reduce that risk of the first level of governance implementing parametric reforms, but it runs automatic. So for instance, the retirement age or the normal pension age will be a function of life expectancy, and the contribution rate could be a function of the projected cost of the fund. So put Social Security on automatic pilot and we eliminate and reduce or mitigate political risk. Doing things right is also important for us as practitioners of Social Security. Management ensures that our institution promote and nurture a culture that is grounded in being accountable and responsible, being transparent, engaging the public, be consistent in our application of the law, and being responsive to the needs of our constituents. We ought to be more intentional about people-centric management. We are working for the people, and we should put people first in the administration of Social Security. We are to ensure all our organizations are acting in the best interest of constituents. We are fiduciaries. Public confidence is key to our success, essential to our success, because we could implement reform whether or not there's public confidence, but we are committed that we need public confidence. We need that buy-in. We need that support. We need to build credibility. We need to build trust, because that's a measure of success by us. But for public confidence to exist, good governance is essential. So, Chair, that's my representation with regards to Social Security reform, the issue of good governance, the importance of good governance from a practitioner standpoint. So, thank you. Chair, I pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart, for a really comprehensive presentation on the topic and the practitioner's perspective. I particularly like your own definition of governance about doing the right things right, and the whole discussion on what are the right things a Social Security organization should be engaged in. Are we doing the right things? But also importantly, are we doing them right? Lots of discussion. I am expecting lots of questions coming out from that. But we are going to move along smoothly and invite Joanna, who is going to speak to us on advancing reform and good governance in the Caribbean and international perspective. Sorry. Oh. Hey, Joanna, the floor is yours.
First, I had to unmute myself. So just to make sure that you are, that I'm correctly sharing my screen in the presentation mode.
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much. So actually, you know that being the last one and having two predecessors that were so eloquent, it's not an easy task for me actually to finish. But I think that while we have heard a lot of very good and interesting points, and not just points, kind of facts, but also questions, how can we do better? How can we improve? what are we missing? What are we doing right? You know, so what I will try to do with my presentation, and I will skip a few slides to avoid repetition, and because I do think that Mr. Thomas and Mr. Haynes already brought a few of the points that I have in those, I will jump, but I would like to bring you, let's say, to do a little bit kind of backwards on where do we find all of this information that can be helpful to ensure and to kind of to also bring some more questions to the debate and to the necessary brainstorming that needs to be done and that is already currently being doing. And of course, that me coming from the ILO, I could not bring, right? Everything related with the normative framework that we usually use. And when I say we, the ILO, it's not we, the ILO office, it's we, the ILO organization, right? So all the 187 countries that are part of the organization that discuss conventions, that discuss recommendations, and that they bring everything, and that actually the organization is the one orientating and guiding us, we at the office, on what member states are requesting us, right? So, and when we talk about particularly social protection, social security, of course that we cannot miss Convention 102 on the minimum standards for social security. And why? Because to date, this convention is the only international treaty that has a systemic vision of social security. So it is grounded in a set of core principles, such as financing, governance, that we have been hearing a lot, administration, right? So, and it includes the responsibility of the state, as Mr. Haynes correctly mentioned several times. It talks us about the rights defined by law, so also the political level that is needed, minimum levels of protection for both contributory and non-contributory schemes, meaning that here this is not about setting just the minimum, is where we should start to grow, right? So this is really about not setting and just sitting on the minimum, but how can we improve and how can we move forward? It also talks about collective financing and financial sustainability. So a lot, again, on what we have hearing throughout this morning. And the participatory management, right? So how do we ensure voices are heard, not only the constituents, not only the management bodies, but also the overall participants in the schemes. And of course, last but not least, everything related with transparency and compliant mechanisms, right? So how do we ensure that we have a good governance in place? How do we ensure that we do the right things the right way? Right? So Convention 102 is one that further sets out, again, the minimum levels of protection to be guaranteed, either in relation to coverage, adequacy of benefits, conditions for entitlement, and duration, with respect to a set of 9 social risks, often referred to as the branches of national social security systems. And you can ask me, so Joanna, but why is it interesting or important to this debate to know this? Because in this document, in this convention, we can find some elements that will help and lead the discussion when we are thinking about what do we want for our countries, what do we need, how can we do it, and how can we do it better. So this is just to bring you these ideas, these principles that are already established under Convention 102, and how we can use them to adapt them to our realities, to adapt them to our characteristics, and to make sure that we have the best systems for our countries. And here we see, so again, talking about universality, comprehensiveness, adequacy. We can talk about sustainability, which is not only sustainability about financial sustainability, but sustainability of the system, of the schemes themselves. We can talk about other principles that are more related to how do we implement the schemes, how do we reach people, how do we ensure the right coverage, How do we ensure adequacy? And all of this, actually, it's to bring something that we call, and actually that Mr. Haynes was just mentioning, this credibility, right? How can we ensure that our system is credible? How can we ensure that people trust? Because if we want to be efficient, if we want to bring effectiveness, if we are sustainable, if we are consistent on how we do things, if we are transparent, if we do allow people to participate and account them for responsibility and accountability of what is done, we can build trust. And trust is an essential piece when we talk about not only good governance, but also social protection systems. And that's why I end up jumping to this slide, because I do think that credibility and trust is the most precious asset of social protection systems. Because if we know that people trust us, if we know that people trust on what we are doing, they will participate, they will engage, and we can then ensure sustainability, and we can ensure a more coherent and integrated approach. But going back to some other elements before jumping into the other slides, and also besides Convention 102, I would also like to highlight Recommendation 202. So Recommendation 202 is about social protection floors. Again, not thinking about limiting, but thinking about where do we want to sit to grow, right? And it's very interesting that even in the recommendation, and there are, particularly in Article 3rd, there are 18 principles that are addressed. And here again, we can also understand that this importance of good governance and the importance of reforms is clearly stated, right? So the need to have a tripartite participation, and even I would go even further than the tripartite, because when we think about more on social assistance and then contributory approaches and schemes, we do have other actors, other stakeholders that are also called to implement and to participate. We have, again, principles such as the universality, again, the adequacy, of course, the definitions by law, because to allow this progressivity, we need to make sure that we have grounded principles, we have grounded laws that will ensure us that regardless which government we have in place, regardless of which director of the NIS we have, regardless the people, there are institutions that can ensure timely payments, that can ensure that our compliant and referral mechanisms work, that we have transparent and efficient procedures. So all of this is important. Sometimes it might seem a little bit, oh, but that's just wording, no, this is really important when we want to build systems, when we want to build social security schemes that are really comprehensive and participatory. And here I would just, to all of that, actually Mr. Thomas mentioned, Mr. Haynes mentioned, the ISA, the International Social Security Guidelines on Social Security Administration. So they have actually a full body of guidelines for social security institutions, and I would like to just highlight two of them. So they have one specifically on good governance that has been updated already a few times. The last update dates from 2019. And then they also have a specific guideline, which is also very interesting for our discussion, the investment of social security funds. So I won't go through them particularly, but I would just like I will leave it here for you to, if you are interested, if you want to learn a little bit more on these international frameworks that we can use for good governance and for investments of social security fund, I would invite you to read them. They are really interesting and they bring us a lot of information. And another example that you can also use is this guide, this manual that was produced. It has already a few years. It was produced more for board members in Africa from social security institutions. But I would say that a lot of things could also be applied to the Caribbean, So again, another publication that you can make use of, that we can also use to enrich our debates and to learn a little bit more. And so this would be one of those that I will skip because it talks about what is the objective of governance. And if you see the pictures that I've chosen, they were not randomly. Actually, I specifically have at least tried to choose some elements that can bring us this idea of trust, of credibility, you know. So everything that can lead us and that can enhance us, this idea of why is it so important, good governance? Why is it so important to be accountable, to be transparent, predictable, participative, and dynamic? And all of these 5 principles are really important to make sure that regardless where we are in the world, we can adapt them to our realities, right? I'm not saying that we need to have blueprints, that we need to do everything the same everywhere, because that's not true. We need to be aligned with our characteristics. We need to be aligned with our needs, with our realities, but making sure that wherever we are accountable, transparent, predictable, participative, and dynamic, to ensure trust, to ensure that the people that need us, they know that we are there for them, right? So, and again, a little bit, something that is also important and that Mr. Haynes also touched upon is that good governance is the key to effective social security systems. And this involves, when we are talking about the implementation level, so what does this involve besides all these principles that are very interesting, but how do we translate these principles into practice? How can we ensure that we are bringing the best policies, the best practices, the best information management systems, we have the best human resources capable and strengthened to provide the best services? So it is important to have strategic and macro policies issues, so determining what is our structure, not only at the state level, but also at the institutional level. Then all the institutional arrangements, right? Deciding where the structure is, who runs it, how is it managed. The administrative operations that make this structure operational, so making the structure to work. And of course, and this is something that was also one of the key messages that we have heard so far, at least I have received it, it's this idea of independence. We need to avoid influence from, I wouldn't call that outsiders, but political level, these policy, not the policy issues, but the political issues that sometimes damage our institutions. So we need to avoid, in order to guarantee sustainability, in order to ensure that we do the right things in the right way. And then, of course, last but not least, and I know that Dr. Henry is very keen on this part, we need to manage risks, right? So we need to make sure that whatever we are doing, we are aware of the risks that we are incurring in, and we need to mitigate them. And managing risks, it's in the broad spectrum of our activity. So this is not just, the risk is not just for the funding policy, the risks applies to everything that we do in the institutions. And this, again, these points are fundamental to build trust in the schemes. And we have also heard the different actors that are involved, either state, employers, workers, beneficiaries, social security organizations. And as I was mentioning, when we talk about social security and particularly non-contributory, we will even have other stakeholders involved. So again, I will jump these slides to make sure that I also keep track of the time, and we do have a little bit time to some question and answers, because I think that would be the most interesting part of this. So just jumping here, you can see that I tried to bring from the guidelines how do we apply the principles, and how do we make sure that in specific areas, how do we apply the principles, and how do we bring everything needed with the strategic planning, the risk management, and all these needed activities to ensure good governance. But I will make sure these slides are shared after. So just jumping to what looking ahead, right? So how do ensure that we are adapt to future challenges? How do we ensure that in the region, what are the challenges we are facing that we need to make sure they are discussed? So it is important, of course, of this ongoing revision and adaptation of guidelines to keep pace with technological advancements. And actually, Mr. Haynes also mentioned the ongoing reform on information and management system across the region. This is something that we need to keep moving, keep adapting, keep making sure that we have not only, it's not just about adapting to the technological advancements, but how do we ensure that by these technological advancements, we reach the people, we reach our beneficiaries. So going from this kind of centered approach, people coming to our institutions, and moving to institution going to the beneficiaries. And I think that with this technological advancements, all these ICTs that we are bringing, this is something that is possible and is happening. Then, of course, we have to anticipate future challenges in social security and prepare to meet them effectively. And here you will also see that in my next slide, I do have a point on this, and it was already mentioned here, the fact that reforms, particularly at the legislative level, take so long to happen means that when they happen, they are already outdated, right? So if I've discussed, for instance, I have an actuarial review that is telling me you need to update your contribution rate by 1-2% this year to commit to the future needs. So you take 7 years to decide on this increase. By 7 years have passed and you missed all this time. When you finally put into legislation this increase, it is already outdated. So you are already running against what you couldn't reach. So this time, the time that it takes to do these reforms are damaging the situation, the sustainability of the schemes. Of course, then you can tell, oh, Joanna, but we cannot face like multiple increases multiple times. Yes, it's true, we know it, but we also need to be conscious. We need to know what we are facing. We need to know that when these schemes were thought, when they were implemented, it was like 30-40 years ago. So there are demographic changes happening. There are labor market changes happening. If we are not capable of adapting our systems to these changes, it means that we end up having a system that is at some point outdated. So we need to keep track of these. And there are several ways of doing it. It's not just by increasing contribution rates. There are other multiple ways of looking into possibilities and exploring options. And I know, Dr. Harry, I'm almost finishing. So just and to the commitment to improve governance and ensuring that social security systems are robust, responsive, and inclusive. So these are some of the challenges. Actually, Mr. Haynes already helped me because some of those, if not all of them, have already been put into the discussion. But I would like to highlight the time needed to approve legislative reforms. And I can tell you that this is not just on social security. I can bring you, if you allow me just 2 more minutes, I can bring you the example of occupational safety and health. Occupational safety and health legal reforms are happening a little bit all over the region, but they are taking at least like 7-10 years to be discussed in Parliament. By the time they are adopted, they are already outdated. So what do we do? How can we ensure that we can keep this decision making independent and ensuring that this is not putting into risk the sustainability of our systems. So this is one of the things that I would like to highlight. And then the extension of coverage to all workers. And again, this was already also mentioned, but I think that this is also an option. When we look into the unemployment rates in the region, when we look on all the possibilities that these people are unemployed, if they were working, and if they were working in the formal sector, that would mean more contributions coming into Social Security. So how can we ensure this good cycle, this productive cycle that can also ensure and contribute to the wealthiness and the healthiness of our systems? Two last points: data availability and transparency, and the linkage with social assistance. I believe that these 2 points are of crucial importance. The first one, because is with data availability that we can make sure that we do and we have the better decision making. And the linkages with social assistance, why? With social non-contributory social security, why? Because more and more nowadays we have a labor market that we do have people coming and going from the labor market a lot of times. If we don't ensure this complementarity, this needed linkages between the one and the other, how can we ensure that we are not duplicating efforts? How can we ensure that we are providing the best answers and to allow people to not suffer that much when they do these transitions in their life? So with this, I would like to finalize by thanking you for your time and just sharing my contact. If you want to reach me, if you need to ask me something, I'm available. And again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so very much, Joanna, for this. Again, as I said, you know, you gave in the international perspective, but you also gave in a little historical perspective with the ILO and the standards. That is the standard that's accepted across the world, really, as the benchmark for Social Security and what it should be. The point you underscored, which Stuart spoke about, because Stuart said about part of the 2 mandates was one, the financial sustainability and public confidence, but you stretch that public confidence in terms of trust and how trust is so critical for the sustainability and the success of Social Securities, because it's a trust that will enable people to want to willingly, and Mr. Thomas also spoke about that, willingly want to comply because they trust that the system is going to work for their good. And we know that Singapore has one of the highest contribution rates, and yet there is maybe one of the highest also compliance rate. And I know in the early days when they couldn't believe it, and they kept running surveys and thought it was just the Singaporeans having their own survey, but the surveys continued to show that the people were happy with the Social Security and paying their high contribution rate because they trust, there was a high trust in the system and in delivering on what it said. Wonderful. And at this juncture, we open the floor for questions and comments. You can open your mics and ask your questions, or you can also use the chat for your questions. We'll do about 10, given the time frame, unless the participants, and by show of hands or indicate, tell me they are willing to stay here beyond 12, maybe up to 12:15. Let us know by show of hands, and then we could extend the time for the question, but we would do the questions for about 12 minutes. It's 11:41 now, 10, yeah, about 12 minutes. And then Chanel will do the wrap up in terms of the deliberative panelists discussions and what has come from the floor. So the floor is yours, please. Please open the questions. Okay, so there's a question from Shamin Metiva. So do you have a sense of the financial or efficiency impacts of information technology, digitization on Social Security expenditure? So Stuart, I think you maybe want to take the first handle on that. I shall repeat the question. Do you have a sense of the financial or efficiency impacts of information technology, digitization on Social Security expenditure?
Yes, all right. Thank you for that question. That's a twofold question with regards to how we assess the impact of digital transformation on the whole Social Security service delivery. So we see the gains in terms of the Social Security delivery, because currently it's on the manual side of operation. So accessing Social Security means coming to the Social Security doors in some countries. So with digital transformation, clearly we meet you where you are, the self-employed, the fisher folks, the van drivers, and that would help push coverage, which is big for us in Social Security, ensure that we have adequate coverage. And also our constituents are really asking and demanding that we improve as it relates to digital technology. So I see that gain. In terms of when you look at a Social Security cost, we use the metric because we use the metrics of administrative expense over the contribution income. And that efficiency ratio varies. I think it starts from about 4 to about 15 in some countries, a function of size and so forth. So what we're seeing is that our administrative cost on labor side would increase, but on the technology side, the licenses fee are significant, and also there would be greater spent with cyber security risk, because we see, for instance, what happened in Trinidad with regards to the ransom attack and the cost that to them in terms of addressing that. So how we looking for this gain is by service delivery. From a cost perspective, we have to ensure the technology drive coverage, because we also want to reach persons in the diaspora. And to reach those persons in the diaspora, we need technology. Because what we're seeing is that with the local market, that migration is high in the region. All right. And we seeing that major risk, sustainability risk, being on the demographic side. So if we can utilize technology to help maintain that coverage, that will be a plus. And we have constituents in the UK, in the diaspora, indicating the need for Social Security to be accessible by them. And the only way that can be accessible is on the front of technology. And we also saw during COVID-19 in terms of how we rapidly scaled up with technology and we were able to deliver. And even St. Vincent now, we have just implemented an initiative, and I saw Grenada implement that during COVID, where we want to cut out manual check payment, because the check manual payment is high. And we have seen now that the proportion of persons receive pension via digitally, or the banking platform, has moved for us from about 70% to about 90-something%. And that has led to great cost savings as it relates to check and manual payment. And what it has led to is improvement in productivity. So we've seen now the processing of application quicker, the processing of a pension quicker. So we're seeing cost savings on that end, and we're seeing productivity gains as well from the use of technology and also our reach, because those persons in the farm want to use their cell phone and access Social Security. They don't want to come into the doors of Social Security. However, we're very mindful of the business model of the technology providers with regard to these licensing fee and the amount you have to spend on the defense mechanism in terms of cybersecurity risk management. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for that. There is another question from Roger McLean. Reference was made to linkages between Social Security and social services divisions. Are there examples of good or best practice in this area, regionally or internationally? So I'll just repeat. Reference was made to linkages between Social Security and social services divisions. Are there examples of good or best practice in this area, regionally or internationally? Reggie, I don't know if you want to take a go of that, and then I will also ask Joanna to give her own perspective on that.
I don't think there are any best practices in the region, but I think the point raised by Joanna in relation to the social protection platform and what social protection and social security is designed to accomplish, enhancement in quality of life and access to improvement of the retired persons. There must be some, and given the size of the countries that we are all a part of and the economic space, there must be some correlation between what's happening on the government side and what it is that Social Security is paying as minimum pensions. And I think that's one of the areas that we need to standardize and, as Joanna said, share data to see exactly that there are no duplications, because if you have one account, and let's say that is from the economic perspective, economic side of it, then how it is that you will have a single person receiving duplicate payments. So I think the need is there for that gap to be filled. I don't think there's any template that is designed yet, but I think there's sharing of data, just like when you have sharing of data for persons who are deceased, so that we know when to stop pensions and that kind of stuff. And therefore, if persons are coming for, or Mr. Haynes says, the non-contributory assistance system in St. Vincent, that only the persons who are existing now, they're new entrants. So therefore, if there was, then are you already in receipt of some kind of social assistance from within the country? But I think that's the space that we need to examine to ensure that there are no duplications, right? Yeah.
Thank you for that. Reggie, Joanna, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for the question. I think for me, it's very interesting, because it's one of the things that I think that in the region we could improve. And I can bring you actually, so 3 examples. And again, as Mr. Thomas was mentioning, I don't think that there is any kind of good or best practices, because it's really about how do you want to make sure, how do you want to do it, right? So I can, again, as I was mentioning, I think that I can give it 3 perspectives, for instance, and particularly taking what Mr. Thomas was saying regarding the old age pensions. If we think that if there is no communication between the national insurance schemes, the institutions, and the social assistance, the non-contributory, we might have cases where social pensions are nearly the same amount of a minimum pension in Social Security, right? So this means that we are kind of saying to people, oh, you don't need to pay your contributions, because you will get almost, if not the same, almost the same amount, but paid directly through tax financed benefits, right? So this is one of the perspectives on why is it so important to have this this dialogue and this, I would call it, sometimes I use the word articulation. So how do you ensure that we can have a complementarity of approaches, right? So this is just one of those. The second one that I could bring you, and this is going back to my own country of origin, actually, we do have just one social security institution that will have all the benefits, contributory and non-contributory. So that allows us, even though we have different budgets to pay for the different benefits, it is the same institution that operationalizes, that implements the benefit in the field. So meaning that we know we do have just one number, either we contribute or not, we have one number, and this one number will allow me to know if I'm receiving something from the tax finance benefits or something from the Social Security contribution. So this is just, again, an example. A third example that I would like to bring, and this, I think this is something that can be, I've recently participated in the Technical Advisory Commission meeting for the OECS Ministers of Human Development, Social Affairs, and it was very interesting because they were debating a lot. There are a lot of countries, particularly in the OECS countries, that are now discussing this, what they call the graduation programs, right? And what are these graduation programs? Is by the cash transfers that are paid through non-contributory programs, how can you ensure that in a household where you do have active people, how do you ensure that they get into the labor market, right? To get a source of income, to make sure that they have at least minimum level of life, right? So what I would kind of a very practical suggestion on how we do this kind of this idea of bringing this dialogue is why, when you are implementing this cash transfer, these graduation programs, why don't you ensure that you bring your NIS, your National Social Insurance Scheme, your Social Security Board to the dialogue, and you have them doing, for instance, a session on how to engage with the NIS, how they can contribute, what is needed, how they can do it, because sometimes there is a lot of a lack of information on people, and this is why even I believe that even the informal sector sometimes is growing, because people are not fully aware neither their rights nor their duties. So this is just, again, a practical example on how to build this dialogue and how to bring social security to social assistance, overall speaking, social protection, and how we can guarantee this intersection. Because more and more, again, the evolution of the labor market, we need to have this dialogue. We need to make sure that these transitions are smooth, and we can ensure, at the end of the day, the most important is to ensure that our people have a decent way of living. So just 3 examples. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna, for that.
If I could touch this 1 minute quickly.
No, Stuart, I have
Okay.
to hold you here. I'll tell you why, because we're rushing against time, and there are 2 questions for you. So when you come to it, you can maybe tie it one time.
Right.
So much has been said on governance and the 3 levels. That's from Frances and Satney. And the 3 levels, which, if done right, should bring comfort. What are the avenues available to citizens to hold these levels accountable? And what recourse is there when trust is broken? So what are the avenues available to citizens to hold these 3 levels accountable, and what is the recourse? Follow-up question. Mr. Haynes grouped about 12 countries not listed where income is insufficient to manage expenses. What are the steps being taken by the governance levels to address these situations? How are these citizens reassured that benefits are not at risk? So, hence the question, the answer is for you to provide, and then you can add your half a minute on the other topic. But answer these questions first, please. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Chair. Well, with regards to the cash flow deficit for Social Security, it's been addressed because that assessment was at 2020. And if we look now in St. Vincent case, that there have been increase in contribution rate and in other countries, so that our total income, and also I mentioned that investment has improved. So our total income, both contribution income, like coming in, and investment income has grown, and we now over the curve by the increase in the contribution rate to cover the total expenses. But in the long run, we're seeing that cost naturally because we partially funded a Social Security. So this will happen again because the contribution rate set is deliberately below the total cost of the program because it's partially funded. Right? So this adjustment in rate would only cover you for a certain period. Then there would need to be other adjustment because we can't get, because what we're seeing is that the benefit is growing exponentially due to factors from the demographic side of things and economic side of things. And we're just choosing finances to treat with that. So that is one. With regards to how you hold social security practitioners as well as board members and government accountable. I mean, we will say educate in terms of the public so that they will know the right question to ask. Because essentially the way the system set up is government appoint board members, government appoint the CEO of a social security organization. We have and to me, it's not the appointment, but the individuals appointed and what those individuals stand for, right? Promoting integrity, start with there. And I mean, management as well as board now also need to work with the government and also provide guidance there. I reckon with regards to holding accountable, it come back to because government responsibility is to provide a sustainable social protection for its people, and the people sometimes are voters. So you could say, you know, it's a real cycle. But I think it's the who is in the positions and how are we now going to promote this good practice of administering social security, being open and honest with the public, following those principles of good governance, would improve the way we do business. So that's, in a nutshell, those two questions. And just to say, I just signed an MOU with the Ministry of Social Welfare so that they could be what we call interoperability, where they would access the live data from NIS to administer their program. And that was funded by the World Bank. That was for the other one. So, Chair, that's my quick response.
Thank you so much for this. And as you spoke about that, and just to reassure and to confirm, because the data has proven it, because I did the study in terms of how governance structures impact performance of social security institutions in the region. And the point you made came out very clearly. And oftentimes people argue it is how the board get appointed. So the government appoints them, so they're going to, just be at the like puppets to the government. And the truth is, the data suggests it's not the how that matters, it's the who gets appointed on the board. So it comes boiled down to the integrity of the individuals. And that is why, in terms of even the epigraph that I've used for my book and as well as my study, was that there is no strong financing without prudent investment. There is no prudent investment without good governance. And there is no good governance without men and women of integrity. We have one more question, and I believe this will be the last question.
Yep.
And then we will ask Chanel to come with the wrap up. Okay, another question is coming. Unless you're not prepared to be here till 12:30, I'm sure the panelists doesn't mind.
Yes.
So good morning, and that's from Ian Ramdahin. Poverty is increasing in society and placing an unsustainable demand on the state to provide social welfare. How is social security schemes linked to poverty alleviation? So the question, how is social security schemes linked to poverty alleviation? Joanna, you want to give it the first go?
I can, and eventually Reginald
Everybody
can
will
also, can also add something on this. And I think that actually this question matches a little bit what we were also trying to bring, the messages on, particularly my message on these linkages between social security or social insurance and social assistance, right? Because when we look into this poverty alleviation, it's not, we needed to bring different perspectives, right? We need to know how the labor market is, what are our employment policies? Do we have pertinent active labor market policies in place? Do we have strong programs on skills development, right? Because this is not just about bringing cash transfers. This is also knowing how, yes, we can provide through social security, through social assistance, some poverty alleviation schemes, but we can bring the cash transfers, but while bringing this support, this income support to households, vulnerable or poor households, we need to ensure that we also match with other programs with our with other schemes on this, coming to how we ensure, for instance, in a household, in a poor and vulnerable household, we do have, for instance, the couple that it's still in active working age. So how can we ensure that we can either build their skills or promote some knowledge strengthening? How can we ensure that they can go to the labor market? They can either through a self-employed position or an employee position, how we can bring them. And this is where Social Security is linked to poverty alleviation, because when these people reach the formal market, when they start working, or they will start contributing immediately. So this is why it is so important. But to reach this level, we need to make sure that our skills trainings, our TVET trainings are available to all and address the needs of the market, because it's not just about training, but training to those specific needs that the market is requesting, right? So we need to know the demand side. What are enterprises in country needing to have regarding their staff? What are they looking to when they are doing their contracts, when they are looking for employees? So, and again, if we go to the employment policies, there is also some programs from state that could also support this interaction, right? So the internship programs, all these job placements programs, all of these will have an impact on how to bring these people, these persons, into the labor market, and how to make sure that they contribute to the social security, social insurance scheme. So for me, this is how I see this link, because it is proof, and actually it was very clear in COVID that the countries that had social security, social insurance schemes more broadened and more and in let's call it more solid, they were the ones that answered quickly to the needs, and they were immediately available to provide not only to their direct beneficiaries, but even indirect beneficiaries. So this, I think that, and again, there is a very recent study from the European Union, so covering not just the developed countries, whatever that means again, but also a lot of other countries. And that is proof that Social Security is the best way to make sure that people don't fall into poverty. So I think, again, that, and this is why for me it is so important to bring all these linkages and the complementarity within the different policies. Thank you.
Thank
Dr.
you so
Henry,
much, Joanna. Yes?
with your permission,
Yes, please. Yes, Derek.
yeah,
And let me just tell him, this is Derek. This is an actuary. In
Chessel.
fact, Stuart Haynes would have told you he was the actuary on the project for NIS reform in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Is also a member of CCROSS. Yes, Derek, please proceed.
Madam Chair, I think that's an error. This is Mr. Chessel Hamilton from St. Kitts,
Oh,
formerly
Chessel.
with the
Oh,
Social
sorry,
Security
Chessel.
Board.
Oh,
Thank you.
sorry, Chessel.
Thank you so much.
So much like Derek. This is Chessel, and Chessel is the long-term employee of the Social Security in St. Kitts and Nevis, and an author of a book on Social Security. Yes, Chessel.
Yes, thank you for your service, and thank you to all of the panelists as well. One of my pet peeves in relation to the whole question of governance at this particular juncture in Social Security in the Caribbean is the constriction, for want of a better word, to the tripartite formula. And I am of the view, and I've been advocating for some years, that that formula should be enlarged to include a fourth representative group, which has emerged as a very significant contributor to our social security systems, and that is the informal sector, the self-employed persons. The principle of no taxation without representation rings high in my mind, because in the case of St. Kitts and Nevis, since 1996, self-employed have been covered, and yet there is no representation of that sector on the Social Security Board. And in my view, with our current slate of board members also having been enlarged to 12, there is space for the active representation of self-employed persons. That I just want to know what would be the thoughts of the panelists on that matter.
Any of you want to give that a go? I see, Reggie, you're very pensive here.
I
Well,
can.
I-
Sorry.
if I may say.
I would say, Madam Chair, and just it's been a long time that you know, the whole, you know, I didn't go deep into my presentation, but we really are to widen the scope of workers, all workers. Mr. Haynes spoke about the countries that are putting unemployment benefit in place and so forth, so that if we redefine the engagement of workers, okay, and workers representative, Chesel, because all workers should be represented within the Social Security framework. So,
Correct.
I mean, because if therefore we're going to change to say specific to self-employed, then somebody else can come up and say something else, given that, you know, where we have now the whole development of AI and all of that, you know, that kind of stuff. So my thing is the category and the framework and the definition of the workers' representative must be broadened and redefined to engage every single category of worker across the landscape, you know, so that we don't be specific as it relates to self-employed and, you know, job, but every worker has a representation so that the persons who are appointed know the scope of what they should represent.
In fact, if I may just add here, to say, in my study, in terms of my recommendation, what I did propose is that the plan participants, no, let me just jump to that. It is therefore suggested that government expands the board to make it multipartite, not just tripartite, by including not just representatives of workers and employers, but also representatives of retired persons and segments of the employer represent to include employers in the informal sector, as well as employees who are not in the formal sector.
Yeah.
Cannot be emphasized enough, however, that having the representatives of the various groupings are not enough. It is ensuring that the right persons with the prerequisite qualifications, experience, and character are nominated and appointed to the boards. So yes, Cecil, I think we all support that move for a multipartite board rather than just a tripartite board, which is the norm. I think that answers the question for you, Alvin, in terms of what role is there for pensioners in ensuring good governance. And yes, if you have a voice, you know, then they can. And but even the pensioners themselves, of course, there is a pension association, and that association in most countries there's a pensioners or elders. They have different names. Some people call it the Association of Retired Persons. Some people call it the Elderly Association, and different names that they too, I'm sure together as a grouping, can engage in discussion and dialogue with the Social Security. There's a question not only by Alvin, but also very early posed by Aline Francis in terms of is there a website? Will this information be made available outside of the Zoom link? And we did speak about that, and I'm sure we will get to that in due course. We will also be getting to our website and our various social media pages, so where we can then engage the audience, the public, in a wider way. But we will make, I cannot tell you definitely in the time frame, but we will make that information available. We have one last question, and I think it ultimately has to be the last question because of time. David Robin, we have heard how sustainable social security is linked to education, employment, underpinned by good governance. A small island developing states in the Caribbean, what is the linkage with environmental sustainability? So we've heard how sustainable the Social Security linked to education and employment. He's asking, how is the sustainable Social Security linked to environmental sustainability? Let me just see if I can just capture a few other questions What do you think should be the role of Social Security schemes in mitigating against the increased burden of cancer care affecting the region? Your presentations were informative and will make good reading to fully assess where we are on such an important topic. Thank you for your time. Looking forward to receiving copies. That's from Francis and Satney. So if we could just, each person maybe a minute to wrap up on the linkage between sustainable social security and environmental sustainability, as well as the role for social security in mitigating against the increasing burden of cancer care in the region. And this will be our last question. I'm sure you can send us further questions and we'll be happy to engage further.
Madam Chair, if I may take the one that
Yes.
relates to access, and one of the things that that I know Professor Theodore and the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, we've been working on over the years is enhancing access for labor force participants and workers to health, and particularly as it relates to preventative health. And when we had the discussions, I remember we had the training in Jamaica dealing with how it is that Social Security makes a contribution to health, because it really has to deal with the participation rate, you know, because if it is that workers are much more healthy, then the sickness benefit expenses come down and they participate in the labor force so much longer. And therefore, you would have heard me mention in my presentation the rise of NCDs, you know, and its impact on labor force participation, and hence access to health and healthcare financing was a theme that we were discussing from St. Augustine, Stanley Lalter, and many of the talk. And those are still current things that we have to put back on the agenda as it relates to facilitating the free movement and so forth, and how that obtains, and even engaging now the short-term benefit mechanisms as you know, moving across the region as well. So yes, that is an important piece that I don't think it is given sufficient attention. You know, Mr. Haynes and as a current member of the heads now can say, okay, how that is sitting on the agenda, but clearly its impact on Social Security expenses and Social Security sustainability as it relates to labor market and labor force participation is a key dynamic.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Reggie, and we really are going to wrap up. Thank you again. Okay, thank you again, Arlene. She just reminds me that, oh, Arlene, that we were from the same, you graduating class of 1988, Arlene from Antigua and Barbuda. Yes, indeed. So folks, thank you so much for your time. But before we leave, don't go just yet. And I thank you for staying on still. I've noticed the majority of you are still on, and that really gives us great comfort. I'm going to invite Chanel Thompson to come on, and who will give us a quick review and summary of the day. And yes, there's great demand for the presentations, and we will make it available because you registered, and so we have the email addresses. And so we will, even if at the first go, before we go to the public, I'm not sure all of our social media platforms are yet in place. We will get that to you. Chanel, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to everyone today for really interesting presentations and a really interesting discussion that followed, that I think really helped to reinforce some of the key points that came up in the presentations today. We had Mr. Reginald Thomas, who opened the baton and, according to you, Chair, scored a century on the start. He forced us, I think, to rethink the issue of good governance within the Social Security systems, and asked the critical question of if what we have in front of us, if it's really working. He asked some other questions which helped to provoke our thoughts, the whys, the what ifs, and the what then. The role of the tripartite entities, or in the case, as we just heard, the multipartite entities, How can we insulate proper governance within social security systems? And then once we embark on this mission to insulate proper governance, what is possible? What are the improvements that can be made? What does representation look like? What will compliance look like? And what would participation and eventual transparency look like for social security systems in the region? We had Mr. Haynes, Stuart Haynes, coming in second, who asked the core question of, are we doing the right things right? He spoke to the coordination between the major stakeholders for social security systems, that is the government, the board, and the management. And of course, he pointed to where the lines may be blurred from time to time. But he also spoke to the crossroads that social security systems are in terms of reforms, the current path, that if we maintain that path is likely to be unhelpful, to be not as helpful to the sustainability of social security systems in the future. But he also pointed to the path of sustainability and what financial governance would look like should we follow that path. And finally, we had Ms. Joanna Borges from the ILO speaking to us on, again, the good governance issue, but tying in really the linkages between the role of social security and social protection within the region. She also spoke to the need to build trust and credibility and the role that governance plays in that, and how governance can help to strengthen those core elements to facilitate the building of that trust and credibility. She spoke also to the international principles or guidelines for social security systems, but also mentioned that really those guidelines and those principles rely to a large extent on reasonability and applicability, if I may use the words of Mr. Haynes, and it can lead to differences at the country level. And then finally, she left us with some thoughts about future considerations for social security systems and how we would adapt to these challenges in order to ensure sustainability and in order to ensure good governance. And in particular, she spoke to the speed of legislative reforms within the region and the need to really increase the rate of reforms in order to enhance sustainability. And then we had some really good questions, primarily mitigating health challenges and the role that social security systems play in that, how pensioners can participate to a greater extent. And then we had that last very interesting question, which I think was an answer, the one on environmental sustainability, which I suspect would come in on the investment side of things as social security systems try to ensure that their portfolios fall within the ESG frameworks that are established in the investment policy. So thank you very much again for lovely presentations, and we look forward to future questions and future webinars from CCROSS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chanel, for this excellent summary of the proceedings of today. And in fact, Joanna has provided answers to the question on the environmental sustainability. In terms of the question on cancer, I'm not sure the social securities have come together to take an approach, but I remember when HIV was, the big thing and creating lots of losses for us, the social securities did come together to finance and fund research and provide support. And Mr. Thomas did talk about the whole issue of NCDs, and we know that's a challenge, and it will naturally impact social security, sustainability, and financing, and I'm sure that's up for discussion. So we promised in 2024, we discussed many issues that we'll discuss at CCROSS, and we have 2 webinars planned for 2024. This was the first, addressing social security reform, the issues and importance on good governance. We thank you for your participation. We will make, and in fact, the presentations will be available on the Health Economics Unit website, and that information was posted in the chat. So please take a picture of it so you can go to the website and find the the proceedings and the papers. And our second seminar, we'll be conducting a lot of research. We have about 10 topics identified, assigned among various members and the Social Security institutions. And so towards the second half in 2024, possibly in November, we will have the second webinar for 2024, and it will address the findings of our research papers on pension reform. So here we gave you the overall picture. You can see the vertical underpinning of pension reform and good governance. In November, we will come with the evidence that we would have collected and gathered from research conducted with and among our social security institutions within the region. We truly want to thank the directors and the boards of our social security and the management and staff of our social security institutions throughout the CARICOM area for their support and their fellowship with CCROSS and ensuring that we get it done. So folks, thank you so very much. I want a big round of applause for our panelists who did an excellent job. So I'm sure we'd have declared our innings, because with starting off with 100, and Stuart added another big 100, and Joanna added another 100, we could have declared our innings and we would still have won that match. So panelists, thank you so much. Chanel, thank you so much. And I really want to thank the CCROSS team, especially the people behind the screen. Pat, Edward Weston, who keeps us on our toes and make sure we forget nothing. And Miss Fieda, I forget the first name right now, who was the one responsible for coordinating all of the Zoom link and meetings and the, how you call that when we had it before, the test runs and all of that, to ensure that we would sound crisp, we would be looking crisp, and that you would have a wonderful engagement. And of course, without you, there could be no us. Without you, this webinar would not have been the success that it is. Your presence, your participation have made it possible. We thank you. We ask you to follow us, and we hope to see you again in November. Love you and bless you, and may God continue to keep us in the palm of his hand, blessing us with his wisdom, his grace, his peace, and his mercy, so that we could all be back in good health, alive, at our next webinar. Thank you. God bless. Mwah.
Blessings aplenty.
Yes, indeed. Blessings aplenty. Indeed. Indeed. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, so much, so much, so much. Yes. And, you know, many of the participants stayed on. That is like so heartwarming. Yes. Yes, indeed.
All right, so everyone, thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes.
I take care.
Thank you.
Oh, Prof, that is such a wonderful comment by you. Janice, I'm so happy you sacrificed your vacation to be here. She told me she was on vacation and she wouldn't make it, you know, and you know, she hoped there would be a link. But I noticed her from very early, and she stayed all the way through. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Dr. Valdo.
Hi, Annette, sweetheart, how you doing?
I'm
Blessings.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Panelists,
Valdo.
thank you.
This is Alvin here. I had a few
Hey,
more questions, but don't worry. I
send
will
it to us.
get in touch with you.
Yeah, send it to me, and I will. I'm
I'll
sure
send you
I
my
forget.
email. I'll email you. So whatever
Great.
concerns again I have, you
Wonderful.
know.
You have my email
But
address,
great
right? I'm
presentation.
putting my email address in the chat.
Yeah. Let me I'll take a screenshot of it.
Yeah. Okay, it's right here.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah. Panelists, stay on, eh? While the others leave. I wanted to stay on, panelists. Yeah, that's an excellent person. Excellent. I feel energized. I'm ready for next session now. We should have part 2 coming up this afternoon after lunch. I feel energized. Oh, that was such a wonderful presentation. Presentations. I mean, I know about Social Security, but such new insights, you know, and that